Hello, glad to see you on the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
It was the 1st of December, a day that used to carry a spark of warmth in my chest. A quiet little tradition I never dared to admit I cared about more than I should have. Every year, like clockwork, the Carter family group chat would explode with tacky Christmas memes, cookie recipes no one ever actually baked, and that one dumb video my brother Brad always forwarded. The guy falling off the roof trying to hang lights while Mariah Carey screamed in the background. This year, silence. Not just radio silence. Deliberate, clinical, surgical silence. And when the ping finally came that afternoon, I wasn't excited. I was cautious, which should have told me everything right there. You don't brace yourself for a message from people who love you. I opened the thread, one image, just one. A perfectly filtered family photo outside Brad's two-story colonial, his wife Trina wearing one of those coordinated flannel pajama sets with the blessed lettering across her chest, the kids with their forced smiles, arms around each other like they hadn't spent the whole year ignoring me, and my 80-year-old mother front and center with a Santa hat tilted just so. It was a full display of holiday perfection, curated for the feed. And me? Not a shadow. Not a mention, not even a caption that pretended to acknowledge my existence. It was like someone had clicked the eraser tool on their lives and just scrubbed me out. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was an old photo. Maybe I missed the invitation somehow. But my stomach knew better. That kind of exclusion isn't accidental. It's intentional. It's the kind of exclusion you plan with silence, the kind that requires complicity. And suddenly I saw it. The layers of betrayal, the way people smile into a camera with full knowledge they're erasing someone who gave up more for them than they'd ever know. I sat there on my worn-out leather couch in the tiny condo I'd worked my ass off to own, watching my phone screen like it might apologize. But all it did was glow, and not one follow-up text came through, not even from the kids I practically raised. I don't know when the tears started, not the dramatic kind either. Just quiet ones, the kind that make your throat hurt more than your eyes. I thought about the year I spent sleeping on that old pull-out couch in my mom's basement after Trina had their third baby and claimed she couldn't handle postpartum without help. I remembered how I cooked Christmas dinner 4 years in a row because no one else wanted to deal with the hassle, and how I smiled through every moment of being the extra hands, extra room, extra time, never once being considered essential. I was useful, and the minute they didn't need me, I became invisible. But this wasn't just invisibility. This was deletion, a full-blown purge. I tossed the phone onto the coffee table and sat back, heart pounding like I'd just run somewhere I hadn't meant to go. My living room was dead quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the tick of that stupid wall clock shaped like a coffee mug. There was no Christmas tree in my place. Hadn't been in years. No lights, no stockings, no candles. I used to joke that I was allergic to holiday spirit, but the truth was I didn't decorate because I always ended up at their place. Their food, their tree, their plans. I had become a guest in a life I helped build. And now, I wasn't even invited to the damn lobby. I remember standing up, walking to the window, and seeing the neighbor across the street stringing lights around his porch, grinning like his kids weren't already inside arguing about Wi-Fi. Something about that normalcy made me furious. Not angry, furious. A deep, simmering kind of fury that made my palms sweat and my breath catch. Because while the world went about pretending that family means togetherness, I stood there realizing mine had quietly voted me off the island, and they didn't even have the guts to say it out loud. I sat down again, slower this time, and picked up my phone. No new messages. Not even from Lisa, my niece, who used to call me her second mom in middle school. I scrolled back through our texts from last year. Messages about her breakup, her anxiety, her job. I was her lifeline then, and now, nothing. I opened Instagram. Brad had posted the photo with the caption, "Grateful for every blessing, family is everything." The gall. I closed the app and let my hand rest on the armrest, staring at nothing for a long minute. Something in me shifted. I can't explain it, not fully. It wasn't like I made a decision right then, but the seed planted itself, quiet and certain. I wouldn't let this be the final page. If they were going to erase me, I'd rewrite the whole damn story. Not with tears, not with a confrontation, not with guilt-tripping texts or late-night phone calls begging for scraps of affection. No, if they wanted me gone, I'd show them what they lost. Loudly, publicly, on my own terms. My phone buzzed. Another message popped up in the group chat. A meme. Santa dancing with a beer. They were already moving on, laughing, sending little red hearts. I smiled, but not the kind of smile you wear in a family photo. The kind you wear when revenge tastes like peppermint. And just like that, I whispered to no one in particular, I'll make damn sure they never forget me again. It's funny how the deepest cuts never come all at once, but instead arrive in tiny, well-mannered pieces, so neatly disguised as normal life that you don't even realize you're bleeding until you're lightheaded with grief. And I suppose that's exactly how it happened to me. Bit by bit, moment by moment, until the silence in my family became not just a background noise, but a permanent condition I had learned to accept without protest. The Christmas photo, cruel and deliberate as it was, didn't arrive out of nowhere. No, it was just the final punctuation on a long, exhausting sentence that began decades ago, when I made the kind of choices that, at the time, felt temporary and practical, but ended up branding me as the reliable one. A label that sounds noble until you realize it's just a more polite way of saying the one we'll use until we don't need her anymore. I was 34 when Brad and Trina called me in the middle of the night, their voices cracked and frantic, because the baby, my nephew Jacob, had a fever and wouldn't stop crying, and Trina, as usual, was overwhelmed by the very concept of parenting without witnesses. I remember showing up at their house in my old Toyota, hair a mess, no bra under my sweatshirt, and not a single complaint on my lips. Just that familiar sense of responsibility settling on my shoulders, like an old coat that still fit, even if I hated the color. That one night turned into a weekend, and that weekend turned into me practically moving into their guest room, bottle feeding Jacob at 3 a.m, making school lunches for Emily and Lisa, and learning the horrifying art of navigating a minivan on snowy mornings just to drop off kids who barely remembered to say thank you. It wasn't glamorous, and it sure as hell wasn't the life I'd planned, but it felt needed, and back then, I mistook being needed for being loved. I had just been accepted into a graduate program in Boston when Brad asked if I could stay just one more year. Trina's mental health was fragile, the kids needed stability, and I apparently was the human glue that held their circus together. So I deferred. Just a year, I told myself. One small delay. I'd still go eventually, but 1 year became 2, and 2 became 5. And then one day I looked up and I was 40, unmarried, ungraduated, and quietly invisible at every family function where people still introduced me as Brad's sister, like that was the full extent of my identity. Nobody ever asked about my dreams or my plans or why I never brought a date. They just assumed I was comfortable orbiting around their lives, grateful for the scraps of appreciation they tossed my way in the form of lukewarm hugs and the occasional "you're such a saint." The problem is saints don't scream, and I should have screamed. I should have said no when they asked me to cancel my trip to Chicago to babysit during their anniversary weekend. I should have pushed back when my mother rolled her eyes at my suggestion to host Christmas at my place for once. I should have walked out when Lisa told me, half laughing, that her friends thought I was like a live-in nanny. But I didn't. I nodded. I adjusted. I made casseroles and carried emotional weight. And all the while, a quiet resentment began to ferment inside me, sour and bitter and stronger by the year. And then came the ultimate betrayal, Lisa's wedding. Not the fact that she got married. No, I was happy for her in a way that surprised even me. But it was how it all went down. I didn't know about the engagement until she posted the ring on Instagram. I wasn't invited to the dress fitting, or the bachelorette party, or the rehearsal dinner. I didn't get a front row seat, I got a back row afterthought. And the part that stung most? When she thanked her mothers in the wedding speech and never looked at me. I sat there holding a gift I had spent 2 paychecks on and clapped along with everyone else, wearing a smile that felt like glass in my mouth. So yes, the Christmas photo hurt. But it didn't surprise me. It was just the logical end of a long line of being forgotten in every way that matters. Erased from family stories, left out of group vacations, uninvited from moments I had helped create. They didn't just ghost me this year. They had been ghosting me for years. Only now they'd gotten brave enough to do it publicly. And the worst part is, they'll never admit it. If I confronted them, they'd say I was overreacting, being dramatic, too sensitive. Brad would put on that condescending smirk he wears when he thinks he's being rational, and Mom would sigh and say something like, "Why do you always make things about you?" As if asking to be included in your own family is a selfish act. That's the sickness of families like mine. The gaslighting is so casual, so well rehearsed, that you begin to doubt your own memory. You start wondering if you imagined the hurt, if maybe you're the problem, if maybe the reason they stopped inviting you was because you were just too hard to be around. But the truth is simpler. I became inconvenient. I stopped being useful. And when people like that can't use you anymore, they don't gently release you. They toss you, like expired milk, with a wrinkle of the nose and no ceremony. So no, this wasn't the first time they ghosted me. This was just the first time I saw it clearly. And this time, I wasn't going to cry into a pillow or drown myself in cheap wine and Hallmark movies. This time, I was going to return the favor, only louder and bigger, and with absolutely no apologies. I stared at my laptop, the cursor blinking on a blank page of Canva, and dragged in the photo of me and Lisa from 10 Christmases ago, the one where she was 12 and still held my hand in public. That version of her would have never done this, and that version of me, she never would have dared fight back. But we're both long gone. And what's coming next? Let's just say it'll be hard to scroll past. There's a certain kind of satisfaction that grows in the dark, the kind that doesn't parade itself on social media or require outside applause, a quiet, deliberate kind of progress that builds itself brick by invisible brick. While the world turns its back and assumes you're still stuck in the same old rut. And that's exactly how I spent the last 3 years. Rising in silence while everyone who used to pity me continued their comfortable little routines, never once imagining that the woman they overlooked, underestimated, and conveniently erased was slowly becoming someone they'd no longer recognize, let alone control. I didn't plan for it to happen this way, and I certainly didn't start with vengeance in mind. But somewhere between ghostwriting leadership books for tech bros and managing content for people who couldn't write their way out of a voicemail, I found myself accidentally successful, quietly accumulating a client list that stretched coast to coast. Each contract another nail in the coffin of the version of me they thought they knew. I remember the first real payday, 5 figures wired into my account after spending 2 weeks writing a memoir for a woman who had never met her own children, yet still fancied herself a family values influencer. And instead of calling someone to celebrate, instead of booking a spa day or buying a handbag I'd never use, I paid off the last bit of credit card debt that had haunted me since I was 39. And then I sat in my living room, alone with a bowl of reheated lasagna, and let that quiet pride wash over me like warm water after a long storm. It wasn't flashy, and it wasn't the kind of moment you photograph, but it was mine, and it was honest, and it came without compromise, which was something I hadn't felt in years. While they were posting photos of brunch and pumpkin patches, I was writing speeches for keynote stages and bios for CEOs. And not once did I need to ask permission or seek approval, because in the world I had created, I was the only one holding the pen. And yet, through it all, I stayed silent. Not because I was afraid, not because I didn't want the recognition, but because I had been trained, whether consciously or not, to keep my achievements quiet, to stay small enough not to offend, humble enough not to challenge, and invisible enough not to provoke jealousy or critique from a family that had always assumed success only counted if it came with a husband, a mortgage, and a golden retriever. I let them believe I was still struggling, still figuring things out, still that dependable side character in their narrative, because to correct them would have required confrontation. And frankly, I didn't have the energy to argue with people who had already decided who I was and what I would always be. But in the privacy of my tax returns and my inbox full of NDA-protected contracts, I knew the truth. And the truth, while not loud, was undeniably powerful. They didn't know that I had bought my condo in cash last fall. No mortgage, no cosigner, just me and a stack of wire transfers that proved I was not only surviving, but thriving in a way they had never imagined. They didn't know that I had been invited to speak at a digital marketing summit in San Diego, or that I'd turned it down because I had too much client work, or that I'd recently been offered a ghostwriting gig for a senator whose book would hit shelves in 6 months with my words on every page and his name on the cover. They didn't know because I didn't tell them, and that silence, that willful withholding, became its own kind of power, a quiet rebellion against the years I spent begging for a seat at a table that was always too small for my story. And then, just days after the Christmas photo incident, I found myself spiraling down one of those midnight rabbit holes, scrolling through articles and videos and ads until I stumbled onto something that caught my breath. Not a job listing or a gossip post, but a headline that read, "Local billboards available for holiday rentals." At first it was just curiosity, a passing impulse, but something about the timing, the starkness of the image, and the raw hunger I still felt to be seen, to be reckoned with, made me click. I browsed the options, flipping through high-res images of towering rectangles of space, just waiting to scream something into the world. And I imagined what it would feel like to drive past one of those, just once, and see my own words blazing against the winter sky while my family, comfortable in their assumptions, squinted from behind their steering wheels, trying to make sense of the woman they thought they had successfully erased. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about visibility, about reclaiming something they took from me when they decided I no longer mattered. I didn't want an apology. I didn't want reconciliation. I wanted presence. I wanted proof that I had outlived their judgment, exceeded their expectations, and become someone who no longer needed their permission to exist. And for the first time in years, I didn't second-guess the feeling. I opened a new tab, typed in my zip code, and started calculating costs. It wasn't cheap, but I could afford it. I could afford it 10 times over. And that realization, that financial autonomy could now serve as emotional revenge, lit something in me that had long been dormant, some feral sense of self-worth that no longer cared about politeness or protocol. I closed the tabs and sat back in my chair, staring at the blank wall across from my desk, and imagining in vivid detail what I would say if given 30 feet of space and the undivided attention of everyone who had ever doubted me. The message wouldn't be bitter. It wouldn't be childish. It would be clear, concise, and unmistakably mine. Something that couldn't be ignored, deleted, or scrolled past. Something that would make them uncomfortable in that precise way truth always does. And as the plan formed in my head, sharp and thrilling, I realized that I was no longer grieving what I had lost. I was preparing to announce, with brutal elegance, exactly what they had thrown away. They thought I was gone. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. The decision, once fully formed in my mind, didn't feel like a moment of madness or some dramatic stunt orchestrated by a bitter, forgotten woman trying to claw her way back into relevance. Rather, it settled over me with an unnerving calm, the kind of certainty that only comes when you have been silent for far too long and finally realize you don't owe your dignity to anyone who has repeatedly spit on it while pretending to love you. The idea of the billboard wasn't born out of some twisted sense of vengeance or the desire to publicly humiliate my family, at least not in the way they would eventually claim, but from something deeper and more primal, a need to be seen, not applauded or adored, but simply acknowledged in a world that had become far too comfortable pretending I didn't exist. I didn't want gifts or dinners or belated apologies with strings tied around them like cheap ribbon. I wanted visibility, clarity, and the unmistakable truth of my own presence looming over their carefully curated illusion of unity. The process of actually renting the billboard turned out to be surprisingly simple, which in itself felt strange, as though the universe had been waiting for me to finally pull the trigger on something that had been festering under the surface for years. I found a location 2 blocks from the Carter family church, the same white-steepled monument where Brad and Trina staged their yearly Christmas photo shoot with the precision of a military operation, every angle planned, every strand of garland fluffed, every child bribed with hot cocoa and screen time. It was the heart of their holiday theater, a place where appearances were everything and truths were hidden beneath layers of polite small talk and matching scarves. The billboard stood tall on the corner, just before the church's parking lot entrance, towering above the quiet street like a silent judge ready to deliver its verdict. And as soon as I saw it, I knew this was the one. It had to be here, in this exact place, where they couldn't look away or pretend not to see it. I kept the message simple, elegant, and deliberate. No photos, no logos, no hashtags or declarations of rage. Just a black background, a white serif font, and one sentence that carried the full weight of everything I had swallowed for the past 2 decades. Success looks good, doesn't it, Joanne? I paid for the space up front, 2 weeks starting December 24th, and didn't tell a single soul. No one from my limited circle of friends, no colleagues, not even my accountant, who would have probably advised against such an indulgence, citing tax implications or branding concerns. But this wasn't a business move. This was personal, deeply, unapologetically personal. It was my way of reclaiming space in a narrative that had systematically excluded me, my way of standing tall in the middle of the page they tried to write me out of. I watched the confirmation email come through with a quiet satisfaction, closed my laptop, and sat back in the stillness of my apartment. Not triumphant or giddy, but centered, grounded in a way I hadn't felt in years. When Christmas Eve arrived, I didn't rush over to see it. I didn't need to. I knew it was there, just as I knew it would inevitably reach the eyes that mattered most. Not the public, not strangers, but the family who had so effortlessly deleted me. I stayed home, lit a few candles more out of habit than sentiment, and prepared myself a dinner that didn't apologize for its portion size or lack of company. A ribeye, medium rare, pan-seared with rosemary, garlic mashed potatoes drowned in butter, and a glass of wine so rich it felt like velvet on my tongue. I ate slowly, deliberately, savoring the strange but welcome taste of satisfaction not tied to anyone else's gratitude. The call started around 9 p.m. First, a text from Lisa, just one word. Seriously? Then came a voicemail from Brad, his voice tight with that performative anger he wore like a tailored suit. Joanne, what the hell are you trying to prove? Mom's upset. Trina's crying. You're ruining Christmas. I didn't respond. I poured myself another glass of wine and watched the snow begin to drift lazily past the window, soft and indifferent, like it had no stake in the unraveling I had just set in motion. By 10, I had 3 missed calls from my mother, all ignored. The last one left a message in that wounded matriarchal tone she used when trying to guilt someone into obedience. You're better than this, Joe. This isn't the way to handle things. You've embarrassed the family. And there it was, that word, embarrassed. As though they hadn't done far worse to me. As though I should have quietly absorbed every slight, every exclusion, every moment of public invisibility, and smiled through it like a good daughter is supposed to. The irony of it nearly made me laugh. For once, they were the ones squirming. For once, they were being forced to feel something other than smug comfort and practice denial. And for once, I wasn't begging for a seat at their table. I had built my own, planted a flag in the ground, and made sure they couldn't ignore it, even if they wanted to. The final message came just after midnight, from Lisa again. Her voice trembling with something between hurt and fury. You could have just said something. You didn't have to. Do this. It's cruel. I stood in the hallway, barefoot on cold tile, phone still in hand, listening to her accusation linger in the air like smoke. Cruel. As if silence isn't cruel. As if deletion isn't cruel. As if ghosting someone who gave up their life for you isn't cruel. And in that moment, I realized something that surprised even me. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel righteous or victorious, or even angry. I felt free. Not because they finally saw me, but because I no longer needed their permission to exist. The billboard wasn't about revenge. It was a declaration, a monument. A mirror held up to the people who thought they could erase someone without consequence. They thought they knew me, now they'd never forget me. By Christmas morning, the town had already started whispering, because of course in a place like ours, small enough to know each other's license plates, yet large enough to pretend that judgment doesn't spread like fire through dry brush. Nothing stays quiet, and a 30-foot billboard with a passive-aggressive bombshell planted right outside the church was bound to turn more heads than just those of my dear family, who by now were likely cycling through confusion, denial, and that delicious cocktail of anger and embarrassment that only arrives when someone who's always played the martyr suddenly decides to become the narrator of her own damn story. I didn't go to church that morning, didn't tune into the live stream, didn't scroll through Facebook posts or comment threads where folks debated whether my sign was a cry for help or just plain old spitefulness, because the truth is, I wasn't interested in their interpretations. I was interested in watching what happens when people are forced to look at something they've spent years trying to avoid. Around 2 in the afternoon, when the snow was falling thick and wet like confetti that had missed its cue, I got the message I had been expecting, but hadn't dared hope for. Brad, ever the head of the family, had decided to host an emergency let's talk dinner. No tree, no presents, no formal invite, just a location and a time, as if summoning me like some delinquent child called into the principal's office. It was classic Brad, emotionally stunted and theatrically disappointed, acting like a conversation with some grand olive branch he had carved out of pure benevolence, rather than the bare minimum a decent human being might offer when caught red-handed treating their sister like an optional piece of furniture. I hesitated for maybe 30 seconds, staring at the message on my phone like it might vanish if I blinked, then threw on my coat and boots without a second thought. Not because I needed closure or forgiveness or some televised apology, but because I knew, deep down in that space where anger becomes clarity, that I was done letting them speak for me. When I walked into the house, Brad's house, Trina's kitchen, their curated shrine to suburban achievement, it was almost comical how quiet everything was, like someone had turned the volume down on the soundtrack of their lives in the hope that silence might feel more respectful, more grown-up, more appropriate given the situation. But all it did was amplify the awkwardness, the heavy unspoken history pressing down on every table runner and scented candle. Trina hovered near the sink, pretending to clean something that didn't need cleaning, while Lisa and Emily sat on opposite ends of the couch like guests at a wake, eyes fixed on their laps, and my mother, God bless her, sat in her usual chair with that expression she always wore when she wanted credit for being present but not responsible. Eyes watery, hands folded like she'd just come from prayer, though we all knew she hadn't set foot in a church except for photos in years. Brad, ever the host, gestured toward a chair at the dining table like this was a casual catch-up, like we might sip cider and chuckle about the weather after airing a 30-foot middle finger for the whole town to see. I didn't sit. I stayed standing, coat still on, boots dripping melted snow onto their perfectly polished floors, and for once, I let the discomfort linger, let them squirm, let them feel the weight of my presence the way I had felt the weight of their absence for years. And then in a voice that didn't shake, and with a spine straighter than I ever knew I had, I spoke, not in rage, not in self-pity, but with the kind of terrifying calm that only comes from someone who no longer needs anything from the people who used to hold her hostage with their expectations. I told them plainly and without ornament that I had raised their kids when they were too tired or too selfish to try, that I had sacrificed my life, not figuratively, not in some romanticized martyr way, but literally hour by hour, year by year, so they could build theirs uninterrupted. I told them that their silence, their exclusion, their carefully choreographed deletions weren't just careless, they were cruel. That it wasn't the lack of invitations or gifts or photos that hurt most, but the decision to live like I was already dead, to speak about me only in past tense, to treat me like a supporting character who should know better than to ask for a line. And when my voice caught, just once, I didn't apologize for it. I let it hang there, raw and human, because the truth doesn't need to be neat to be valid. They didn't interrupt, not once. Whether out of guilt or shock or fear that I might finally break into pieces. Right there on their hardwood floors, I don't know, but the silence that followed was the most honest moment we had shared in years. My mother sniffled, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue she had kept tucked in her sleeve like all women of her generation do, and whispered something about not knowing I felt that way. Lisa apologized, though it was the kind of apology that tastes like ash. Well-meaning but empty, laced with the implication that my feelings were unfortunate rather than valid. Brad, to his credit, didn't say much, which was probably the most respectful thing he could have done. And Trina? She left the room. Whether to cry or hide or avoid taking responsibility, I didn't care. When I left, no one stopped me, no one hugged me, no one offered to walk me out. I didn't need them to. I stepped into the night, the snow now falling heavier, the world washed in white and silence, and I drove past the billboard one last time. It was still standing, still bold and unapologetic, but someone, probably a local prankster or maybe just a coward with a grudge, had spray painted across the bottom in messy red letters. One word, bitch. And you know what? I laughed. Not because it didn't hurt. Because it did, in a small, stinging way, but because it was proof that I had finally shaken something, disrupted the perfect little lie they'd been living for years. And in that moment, standing there with the engine running and the snow coating my windshield like ash, I realized I had become unforgettable, not through kindness, not through quiet service, but through the audacity of demanding to be seen. I didn't take the sign down. I didn't file a complaint. I didn't clean it up. I left it, graffiti and all, because in its own twisted way, it was perfect, truthful, raw, and reflective of everything this journey had been. I didn't win, and I didn't lose, because this wasn't a competition, it was a reckoning. And when I got home, kicked off my boots, and poured the last of the wine, I didn't feel triumphant or smug. I just felt done, not with them, not with the past, but with waiting to be chosen, because this year, I didn't wait for a chair at their table. I built my own, and I sat at the head of it, alone, and that was enough.